Brian, what's the most expensive ERP project failure you've seen?
A client came to us after spending north of 4 million with another SI, completely avoidable if they had done an architecture up front holistically, in my opinion.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Rachel, your moderator today. And if you own a P&L, run operations, or steward your company's tech stack, you're in the right room. In the next few minutes, we're going to show you how to stop ERP programs from bleeding cash, time, and credibility, and how to ship with confidence instead. Joining me today, I have two field generals, Brian Willman, founder of TechFino and the NetSuite architect behind 50 plus implementations. He's the person that teams call after the burn. He's rescued more than 20 This Is on Fire projects. I also have Yafa Rabkin here, president of RPSI Global. She has 2 decades of experience in ERP readiness and process design across distribution, tech, and healthcare. She's the one who helps prepare businesses for transformation projects, get their house in order with processes, requirements, and all of that. So here's what you're going to get from us today. If you're a CFO, you're going to learn where overruns really start and how to prevent them, and how to avoid those 7-figure rework projects. If you are a COO or ops director, today you're going to hear in the stories how to de-risk handoffs and integrations, how to set real timelines, and how to keep your team out of those 80-hour work weeks. If you are a CIO or CTO, you're going to hear in our stories today how architecture and data discipline can cut technical debt before it accrues interest. So we're going to start with 3 field stories: before selection, mid-flight, and then post-go live, so that you can win at every stage. And if you stay till the end, you're going to get our 1-page readiness checklist, plus an invitation to a free 30-minute ERP readiness consultation, an appointment with purpose, so that you can walk away within 48 hours of that call with a simple go, no-go, or optimized roadmap for your implementation. No sales deck, just guidance. So we're going to keep this tight, pragmatic, and free of vendor fairy tales. Let's get into it. Every ugly ERP story shares the same villain. It's tech before process, skipping that business blueprint and jumping straight into configuration. When that happens, we see that 55% of mid-market projects blow past budget or timeline. And the human cost is real as well. You've experienced this. UAT drags, SMEs work 60 to 80 hours, vacations vanish, turnover spikes, and tribal knowledge walks right out the door. Here's the part that CFOs are going to feel immediately, though. For every $1 invested in planning and architecture, you're going to save roughly $10 in those post-go-live invoices. You know, the rework, the hot fixes, and all those extra vendor hours that you never wanted to buy. The fix here is a different sequence that we're going to talk about today, that Brian and Yafa are going to tell these stories in how we get there. And that starts with strategy, then architecture, then build. We put seasoned solution architects in early. We document future state processes across systems so there's no silos. And we treat data architecture as a first-class work stream. We add governance with steering committees and RACI and scope control and architect sign-off so that dates are real and risks are owned. Now, for CFOs, that's how you stop dollars from leaking. For you COOs, that's how handoffs and integrations don't derail your schedule. And for the CIOs here today, this is how you're going to avoid a graveyard of custom fields and scripts. All right, let's start with our 3 stories and show how this design build mindset is going to save you millions of dollars, months of work, and morale within your company. Let's jump into this. Tell us about our first story with a leading tire manufacturer and your experience with sunk costs and delays.
Great. So this client in particular, they've been engaged with an SI for a couple of years. The engagement was multi-million-dollar engagement, a really large team that was assigned. At the time of UAT, they were going through multiple cycles of UAT. It was just a very iterative approach, multiple cycles, and they're constantly kind of struggling with UAT dragging over a course of months and months and months. So the client ended up getting frustrated because they were tired. It was multiple cycles. The team was burning out, and they just didn't feel like they saw an end in sight. So client was struggling, and as they were struggling, they reached out. They were looking for help, and we stepped in. We came in, and we got engaged. And through that engagement, we looked under the hood. So what we learned is when we got under the cover is that the project was actually managed very siloed. And that means that if you kind of take at, order to cash, procure to pay, kind of other areas, managed in silos, from requirements to even architecture. And then worse was the build. So then what happened was when they got to UAT, the end-to-end process wasn't coming together. It wasn't working. And months and cycles, and they're in the weeds of the individual issues that are coming up. So what we were also surprised at is the documentation. Let's refer back to documentation and we could see where things are failing. Well, the documentation is not holistic. The documentation is not complete.
It's insane. It's really, we see it very frequently when someone's calling after, going through a year or two of an implementation. In this case, $4 million in over 2 years with another SI, and they're exasperated. They're feeling the pain from how expensive it is to pay for the software and for the SI where it's not working. And then we come in, realize what has gone wrong after asking, the same questions. Do you have any documentation? Do you have a project plan? Do you have a PMO? Do you have requirements, design, traceability down to your test cases? No, no, no. Okay. Wow. I wonder how we got here. In this case, the big question when we saw that there was 20 systems and 100 data flows is, how has this been architected? Can we see sort of the architecture, the technical design here? Oh, we don't have that from our, oh, well, it's a real shame. And then, of course, we have the solution. We can propose, basically to spend about the same money to do it right this time. And now the customer is, hesitant to do that because they've already been burned by the other SI. And so that makes it even more difficult for us to come in this situation.
Right. Actually, what also made it super, super frustrating is that the go live date was constantly revised. So there was a constant promise to a revised go live date, but nobody actually took the time to say, what are we basing this revised go live date on?
Yeah.
What is still remaining to be done? What is the volume of use cases that needs to still be pushed through the system? What is the volume of data that we still need to load up? Like, how are we just coming up with revised go live dates? But what is this based on even, right? So again, you revise it once, you revise it twice, and it's multiple times on this particular engagement, and client is frustrated. The business leads are frustrated, and there's so much time that's invested. Like there's money that we talk about, the businesses invest, but we have to pause and ask ourselves the investment from the business and the fact that they are putting resources of their own towards these projects. They're backfilling often for those roles. So there is, it's not just the $4 million or 5 or 6 or whatever the number is that, is in SI payments. It is, what is the internal investment as well?
Some costs and delays happen when processes are skipped or when you don't have the right people in the right seats on a project of this importance.
Wow, what a great story to start with here. And, from the field, real life stories that you're seeing. It's hard to believe sometimes that this is happening, that companies are spending that kind of money, following bad processes. But when we get in and see it, that theme really landed. There's sunk costs and there's delays, and they happen because process is skipped, right? So thanks for sharing that story. Now, what if a company is already mid-flight and drifting? What does that look like? I think, Brian, you've got another story about a hometown hardware chain and your experience there. Tell us about that one.
Sure. So I actually received this phone call about 4 years ago. This was a True Value hardware store with several stores in a regional area. And they had they'd purchased from NetSuite Direct and had a 8-month project plan. And fast forward to, when they finally did go live, that was 30 months later. So we came in after they had missed their first go live date. They had no project plan really. They had no documentation except for several scripts for customizations. The entire project team had rolled over. Basically, every single consultant that worked with this hardware store had left and been recycled. So the whole team had to basically learn again this client's business, and sort of that was a big contributor to this project delay. But there was also several other vendors that needed to come together and all work to build a cohesive solution for them to go live. It wasn't just, the NetSuite. It was also, several other modules like WMS and demand planning and so forth. And not only was this client paying for the software for one or four or five different softwares throughout this entire 30-month journey, they were also paying, for support that they couldn't use until they were live, right? So that just kind of poured salt into the wound, if you will. And so I think if we could have hit the rewind button, we would have definitely brought in our PSI Global at that point to help sort of PMO. And I'm sure, Yafa, you could, tell us what you would do in that particular case. But I think our role, just all we could really do in that particular case, because we're a NetSuite vendor, is really guide the customer and provide sort of a second opinion or offer to help on different initiatives that came up during the project. But really, we couldn't step on NetSuite's toes, so we had to be very careful there. So I'm not sure what you would offer in that particular case. How would you have handled that?
So I think in this type of situation, we would be involved in, there's project management and there's an administrative side of the house to project management, but there's also the program management. And that's when there's multiple vendors that make up the whole scope, right? And what we find is exactly in these scenarios, you have the ERP in the middle, you've got some of the best of breed solutions that you're integrating with various different third-party vendors. Everybody's pulling in a different direction. Everybody has their own interests and their own goals to satisfy. So someone really needs to be managing on behalf of the customer and sitting on that side of the table to be able to hold vendors accountable, to be able to really draw the line of which vendor is responsible for what. Because in these situations, how often do we hear a vendor say, that's not my piece, that's the other vendor. Well, is it really, right? So being able to convey that, being able to explain it, and being able to hold everyone responsible to not just scope and escalations, but overall progress, right? Overall, like when we look at the RAID list, the various action items, the various decisions that are made, what decisions can be made within a smaller group, what decisions need to be brought in, bringing in other business leads, other vendors, because there is interdependencies across various vendor solutions. So that's where we would come in, and that's where we would provide oversight and incorporate that into a holistic project management instead of each vendor is representing a status update that is just theirs from their lens, right? So really managing it more from a broader point.
I think in this case, the operations manager, I remember she was basically taking on the role. I don't know if she was aware of it, but she was basically taking on the role of what I would call like the general contractor, to use a house construction analogy. And I don't think she was really equipped to sort of, like you said, sort of realize when someone was not really correct or was out of turn, and really hold people accountable throughout that entire project. And in this particular micro vertical, what I've seen is two lawsuits just for where the implementer was not able to get the integrations to the True Value or the Do It Best or Ace Hardware, to get the catalog of items and the POs and the EDI integrations all working in time, and that would prolong the project and the expense here and lead to a lawsuit later. So it didn't surprise me that it was going to take this long, but I didn't think 30 months. I was expecting maybe 18 months. In this
Right.
particular case, it really drug on. It's a shame.
It's interesting because sometimes companies think that, oh, the PMO is something I could do in-house, as in, I'll just take someone who's in AR, or I'll take someone who's in the AP group, and I'll just give them the responsibility of project managing, right? Um, and sometimes it ends up hurting the project and ends up hurting the process because they're not trained to be a project manager. It's not just, action items. It's not just an administrative to do, right? There is being able to manage people, manage risks, hearing what's not being said, right? Or hearing that what's being said, but it's like sifting through what's being said. There's just so much more to the PMO than how some people, may perceive it to be. Yeah.
And I think in many cases, what we see in the market these days is a lot of clients are coming in with sort of this expectation of being sold by NetSuite and maybe other SIs that, this is fast, cheap and quick, right? And when it turns out it's a lot more complicated or intricate, or there's more to it than meets the eye, that's where these projects can go off the rails, right? You're being told, oh, this is quick, this is easy, don't worry about it. Yeah, that should, your team should be able to handle this, and we'll be able to do
That's
this,
right.
and we'll all kind of work. And
Oversimplifying,
it's not,
oversimplifying.
yeah,
Yeah.
very much so.
Wow. So, okay, so this story is really intriguing to me, right? Because here you see a situation where it was promised in 8 months, it was 30 plus months, almost $1 million over budget, delays. But really the bigger story here is about, de-risking those handoffs, the operations that turned into a general contractor job of sort, right? Coordinating all the different vendors and the one-to-one integrations and the project timeline that got off track. And I think this is something that could have been avoided with that strategy and architecture up front, right? Before the design.
Right.
So, and Brian, you mentioned multiple lawsuits that you've seen, right? This isn't just a risk when it comes to budget and timeline and getting the job done and employee morale and, all of those things, but you've seen actually legal risks involved when you find yourself in this situation.
Sure. I mean, that's the remedy once you've had all these sunk costs and the project has dragged on. Unfortunately, that doesn't, reimburse you for the opportunity costs. Your team could have been, growing the business or expanding into new markets or what have you, right? So unfortunately, it doesn't cover that.
Yeah, the risks escalate there in multiple ways. I like what you said, that opportunity costs involved in spending this time and this money in this way. Okay, so now we've heard a couple of stories where they're mid-project and it needed rescued, or we can reel this back in. But Yafa, you have another story about a health tech company that you worked with that had completed the project and needed support afterwards. Tell us a little bit about that project.
Right. So again, we get engaged either during the planning phases or during an implementation where clients feel like we have an SI, we have progress, but we're concerned about the progress, right? Or we come in post, so clients already live, and they're just not comfortable with the results that they're getting. In this particular case, that's what happened. So the client went live, their post go live, they're operational, they're using the system. But it wasn't even the client actually that reached out, it was the PE firm, because this was escalated to the PE firm as a challenge. PE firm reached out and said, can you go in there and look under the hood, see what's going on? And we did, and what we learned is that the client was struggling, that the GL impact was not the desired GL impact. So their financial reports were not providing the information that they need. Also, anything to do with reports analytics was just challenging. They're not getting the data that they needed to see. So, we often say, in particular in the NetSuite space, we say, put 10 consultants, different consultants or architects in a room for one particular issue. They'll solve it in 10 different ways, and that's okay. But we have to understand the drivers. We have to understand what is that foundational GL segments, right? Your natural accounts, your segmentations. How do you want to slice and dice the system? And it's really your requirements for outputs that will drive the foundational architecture. So here what we found is that the baseline architecture was not done in a way to satisfy the reporting, the outputs that the client needed. So again, it's about not having the right people around the table in terms of consultants. Again, we engaged Techfino, brought Techfino into this engagement. And then that's when we started doing the very deep dive re-architecture, right? Based on a list of very specific optimization projects, right? Yeah.
We also clarified requirements that were not really documented. we established an evergreen documentation approach as we were coming in to help re-architect and re-engineer not just the geo impacts and the master data, but also just the design so that, our ongoing support could, continue to optimize the account over time and keep a single picture of what was being built and why.
Right. And then specifically for this engagement, even something as fundamental as revenue recognition, because again, the types of products they were selling, the type of revenue recognition they needed. There's so many optimization projects that we summarized for them that they would need and kind of prioritize that list and just methodically going through and making sure that we even group certain optimization projects together just so that we can optimize the allocation of time to come up with the right solution and then the code, right? So that we're not writing code from scratch every single time and
Minimize
looking at
testing.
things.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And I think also what we were finding is that we were asking questions, so it's, not just add a field, but why are we adding a field? And do we already have this field somewhere else? And so we would find in some cases you might have two fields that are one's used for reporting and one's used by a script. And it's like, we don't have a single source of truth. And that was, a big part of what we did here was really creating that single source of truth.
So Brian, I think in terms of technology and architecture and the fields and the mapping and the source of truth, from a technical perspective, there are like very deliberate solutions to, interventions to solving this. When it comes to the business impact, though, right? You've got the misunderstood, the messy integration, and the GL misunderstanding, and the duplicate fields, and those kind of things. The impact of the business, though. I understand finance was closing their books how many days late? Like how this trickles down to business impact, right?
Right. Yeah. I think what, the month end close process at that time was 14 days. And after a few of our, projects, we were able to get that down to 4 days. And there was about 400,000 found in missing freight that we recovered. So these are some of the, the outcomes from sort of the office of the CFO that, we were able to experience in this project.
Right. So Rachel, if I can also add, I've worked with so many SIs being in the space that I'm in, doing the type of work that we're doing here. We work with various SIs and we have so many SIs, different ones across the table from us on various different engagements. And it's interesting how the common kind of model is to follow a questionnaire when you're asking a question, when you're collecting requirements, you're following a questionnaire. It's a checklist of questions. And what we're finding that's different in our approach, and certainly when we bring in Techfino, is it's not just questions off a questionnaire. It is, we ask questions depending on the answer that's provided. That's when we're doing the follow-up. So you're really getting to the source of the challenge or the source of the requirement and the complexity of the requirement. Following a questionnaire doesn't allow you to dig deeper, if I can say that, right? It almost forces you to stay higher level. And at the higher level, everything is vanilla or everything is simple and straightforward. It's when you're diving deeper that you realize where the complexity lies, right?
I agree with that. I had someone tell me earlier this week that kind of interview style where you lead with curiosity and you're adaptive in the questioning versus the checklist, they called it old man curiosity. And I thought that was a clever way to
Oh, I agree.
describe how we dig in when we do those interviews, and we are not just following the checklist, but we're really searching for the truth of the matter. So we know our exact current state, where we need to go, where we're headed there.
Right.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And that impacts the business in a couple of ways, right? For the CFOs listening, accuracy, faster close, cash recovery, plugging the leaks, like the 400,000 in reports that you found from the one report, right? In freight costs. But, for the CIOs, Brian, like you mentioned, that single source of truth, the fewer custom band-aids, that are plugged into the system, this approach here solves several of our pain points across the organization. So, this is
One other point, Rachel, is especially in this particular engagement. We went from a C-suite that on day one said to us, we don't trust the system. We don't trust the data in the system. And to be able to take those statements to confidently using the system, confidently using the data, leveraging the dashboards, right? That's an accomplishment, right? That's what the business is looking for. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's technical, but it's also instilling that trust and confidence in what they're doing. And that allows people to sleep at night. Yeah. That's
Yeah.
big. That psychological safety of knowing we did this the right way. We can rely on this to run our business. That's really a big point here. So to recap, this third story here, it's a story of technical debt. It's a story of bad data that and leaks solved by that continuous architecture. So, Brian, if someone is you and I had a conversation a little bit earlier in the week about how when someone is planning a project, that it's important to go ahead and to budget in what happens after the project goes live, because is it typically the scenario that a project goes live, budget is spent, and then it's over, and it just ends there? It's like everything works beautifully and perfectly, from then on out. Like, describe that to me. Like, what happens post live, and what should people plan for and be prepared for?
Yeah, sometimes what we find going into the project, some of the assumptions that are made is that, okay, you're coming from QuickBooks and you're now moving to NetSuite, that, maybe QuickBooks is as simple as NetSuite, and, you don't really require an in-house admin or somebody skilled in NetSuite, design and administration. And you can do that in-house, right? And that's maybe the approach you were taking before, but maybe after you realize, you know what, actually, we need some support here. When NetSuite has upgrades, we don't know what we're doing. When there's a new project or enhancement, we're bringing back Techfino to help us with this. But they're making changes in the system after they go live, and there's no sort of, police, somebody that's like, okay, this shouldn't be published to everybody. This saved search is, clouding everyone's view of when they're looking at reports, and it's only for this one person, So those type of sort of system maintenance and support aspects are really important to consider. And sometimes they're not, really given enough attention in the sales process when they're going into that implementation. We find there's that additional budget that we're asking for post go live, because we're realizing that after UAT, the team isn't really enabled enough to take over the administration or the support of their account, or they need some additional support, maybe on the technical side. Maybe they have somebody that's more on the business side that's savvy enough to make most of the decisions, but they need some of that technical support. And so that's some of the things that you may need to consider looking into a little bit deeper in that initial sales process.
Okay. And that the strategy doesn't end with go live. We still have to, be strategic. It's still strategy before tech, right? It's still process before tech implementation, even after go live. Brian, you and Yafa both talked to me about some signals, readiness signals for companies, and then also some red flags. And I think the audience and those listening, whether you're CFO, COO, CIO, CTO, there are some really clear signals that we can look at ourselves and look at our business and look at our implementations and pinpoint if this is happening. That's a red flag, or that's a green flag. So let's start with some of those readiness signals that are green lights that you see within projects when you walk in and you kind of evaluate whether it's pre or whether it's during or whether it's post go live. What are some of those green lights that you see? You look at a project and you say, this is good. What are some of those indicators?
Right. So I'd say one of the more important ones, I'm sure Yafo would agree with this one, is really assessing the caliber and the capacity of the SMEs on the client side. Making sure you have named SMEs that have the experience, knowing how the business operates intimately, that have real bandwidth available. They're not being distracted by other, priorities, other projects during this enterprise transformation project. And that can really help us re-engineer the future in the new system, not just lift and shift processes, but also optimize and improve them so that in the new system, you're actually getting the value of improving systems that probably have been just languishing for 10 or sometimes up to 30 years, depending on how long the business has been on the legacy system.
Right. And then these same SMEs are the ones that are ultimately, they're articulating the current state. They're articulating where are the gaps, what are they not getting out of their legacy system that they need to get out of a new system implementation. And then often those are some of these SMEs also take the role of change champions, right? And they participate in the whole track of change management. And then also, kind of as we're looking at managing the projects, right? And managing the requirements, we're working with those same SMEs to be able to prioritize requirements, right? So that the prioritization comes into play as well. And then through that prioritization, what makes it to a critical path for the initial implementation versus what ends up getting on a parking lot. And those are future optimization projects. And tying this right back, Brian, to what you said earlier, is when the project's over, sure, we have a stabilization period, but often we roll right into taking a look at what's on that optimization parking lot and start working on those as future phases. But yeah.
I think another one is really documenting the as is and the future state processes that you have, those swim lane diagrams that document across all of your systems, not just the new system that you're implementing, and don't just silo, order to cash. It includes procure to pay, record to report. All of the different various processes should be documented in the new system. If we don't see that, that's a red flag. If we do see that, I'd say that's a green light.
That's right. That's right. And then with that, data migration, right? So not so much the migration, but data readiness. And where is the data at? Quite often, companies are saying, when you ask them about their data, their first response is, we could deal with that later. It's more of a go live thing. It's more of a cutover thing that we're months ahead of this. And that's not necessarily true because data and understanding data, again, defines the data flow for integrations across systems. There is an extraction versus transformation versus importing. So people think, oh, I can extract in 5 minutes, but if your legacy systems are rigid, you might not be able to extract in 5 minutes. It might take days, if not weeks, to extract. So data ownership, transformation, overall readiness is either a green light or a red light. Yeah.
And I'd say another one is really on the financial transformation, really having working with the CFO or the controller in the chart of accounts redesign, making sure you have that plan so that you can leverage the dimensions that you get in NetSuite, for example, versus your legacy chart of accounts. There's definitely a lot of value in simplifying and spending some time here during this project. Making sure you're set up there. So that's another one we try to look for. We don't want to just copy the old chart of accounts into the new system and go, right?
Another one is PMO governance, where PMO is at in terms of alignment across steering committee, across business leads. Do folks really understand RACI and the RACI model? Who's responsible, who is accountable, who needs to be consulted with, who needs to be informed? What is the communication plan like? Are they communicating on a regular basis? And then managing the entire toolkit that is, again, foundational for the entire delivery of the project.
I think another one is having a dedicated solution architect assigned to any engagement that has 4 or more systems that you're integrating. Or where you're looking at an implementation in the NetSuite world of over 1,500 hours, right? Those are kind of the two that I look at.
Post go live, again, coming back to the list of optimization projects that have been on a parking lot. It's not about just the initial implementation. It's about optimization projects, how we want to prioritize those optimization projects, and also to get a sense, and this kind of goes back to SMEs, but more so within IT, is who is going to administer the NetSuite account in this case, right? On a go forward basis, is the SI here to stay, or is the company kind of thinking through that they need to enable a person to take on the admin role? And now, is it just a functional admin role? Is it a technical admin role? Is it an admin role that understands operations? Because in consulting, we have the functional technical slash operations knowledge, business knowledge. In IT, this is where we could also have some risks and how we determine whether, it's a green light or potentially a red light for how enabled is the admin person on a go forward basis past go live, right? And their overall expected involvement throughout the life cycle of the project.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, so all of these are signals, right? All of these are readiness signals as to whether a project is strategically on track. What are some of the red flags, Brian and Yafa, when you look in and you walk in and you look at a project, so what are some of the things like lowest bid wins mindset, right? Brian, that you probably run into that.
Yeah, so I think that's a great one. To be honest with you, one of our clients that we've worked with over the past several years, they first came to us to buy NetSuite, and they wound up picking another SI because their bid was about, I think, 10 or 15% lower than ours, right? And so they went with them. They told us about it, and then they came back sort of begging us to take them back as a client after they had implemented NetSuite and weren't happy with their implementation. So that's a case where basically it was 10 or 15%, which was really separating them from us. And now they're extremely happy working with us. And there's at least 2 or 3 other stories where I've heard somebody that came to us, we bidded on the implementation, and we were just a little bit higher, and they went with the other one, and we're not happy. So we see that all the time.
Yeah, I think the word psychological safety keeps coming back to mind here. To know that you're in good hands and to know that you're with someone that can lead you around the obstacles. And it goes back to your cost curve, that we talked about at the beginning. For every $1 spent in planning reduces you $10 spent in invoices later. So this is you're telling us real life examples of that happening. And Yafa, you had shared with me a story about a company that set a go live date before the requirements were even defined. I'm sure that's a red flag.
Absolutely. I mean, some companies do have a driver, as in a year end is date X. So we would like to cut over at year end. So some targets, they make sense, but we have to ask the why are we setting up that go live date, right? What is the driver? And it's important to recognize that it's a target go live date, meaning until we really unpack the requirements, until we really unpack the complexity of the system landscape, how many systems, how many vendors, the SMEs that are going to be partaking, it's very difficult to just jump and establish a date. So to me, that is when someone's saying, "Oh, this is the date that I want to go live with," it's a risk. It's a
Yeah,
risk.
that's kind of like my next red flag, which is actually, basically very similar to, an unrealistic go live date is just not having a project plan at all. I've talked to at least 2 or 3 what I call burn victims that have called, and when I ask, can you show me your project plan or where you are? Well, we don't have a project plan. We just get a report saying, we're red, green, or yellow. There's actually no sort of milestones that they're looking at, and they don't have a clear articulation of what it would take for them to sign off on UAT. So I think that's the next red flag. It's really just an unrealistic or no project plan at all.
Another one in terms of a red flag is, in particular, some departments will come in with hundreds of different spreadsheets, right? Manual spreadsheets, and those are the spreadsheets that they use to control the processes, right? And to drive data. So there's certain expectation that individuals that live in spreadsheets have, but the reason it's a red flag is because when you're transitioning to an ERP system like NetSuite, it's an integrated end-to-end system, which means that you're no longer in your own spreadsheet and controlling your own data. Anything you're doing has an impact on other departments and data in other areas of the application. So that's an interesting one for us.
I think the next one is really when we look at clients that have, 4 or more systems to integrate with and or really high volumes or real-time data import integration requirements. When there's no architect to really pull that together and create the blueprint and the technical architecture, that's definitely a red flag.
So with the lack of architecture too, when we're looking at a UAT timeline, if someone sets a UAT timeline to a traditional kind of templated, let's allocate 4 to 6 weeks to timeline, let's allocate 4 to 6 weeks to the UAT timeline. Well, that is a red flag because we, again, don't know the lift. We don't know the complexity yet. We don't know how many systems yet. We haven't even put together a UAT plan yet, but yet 4 to 6 weeks is what's being allocated. UAT is where we're at the heart of validating that the solutions are meeting the requirements, that the system is doing what it's designed to do, not just at the unit test, not just at the process test, but end-to-end testing in particular when you're dealing with multiple systems. So 4 to 6 weeks, typically when you have more than 1 or 2 systems to integrate with, that's really that's not enough. That's premature. That's insufficient. Whatever word we want to use, it's just not enough. Yeah.
I think the next one is really on the purchasing side. So I see a lot of companies that really don't know how to make the buying decision on the software side. So really either not knowing how to choose the software properly for their industry or vetting the system integrator, the implementer. Especially as in the hardware store example, I said there was 2 lawsuits recently around the integrations, and so managing a project like this should have they should have realized that they needed to bring in somebody that could manage this for them. So that's really the next one, is really buying software and knowing either somebody in your team has this experience, has seen this done successfully in their industry, or they're going to bring in somebody to help them make that decision correctly.
Right. So Brian, for that one in particular, there's a difference, right, between the software and selecting software versus selecting the implementer. And even in the process of selecting an implementer is who's going to be at the table? Who are the consultants? Who are the architects? Do they understand my industry? Do they understand my business? Right.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. And then the last one that I can, think of in terms of red flags is when you're asking any question and you get the answer is, we don't know, but we'll figure it out later. We'll figure it out later. Do you have that document? No, I don't have it, but we can figure it out later. It's really underestimating the importance of what's being requested, which means that we are just generalizing and underestimating every aspect of the implementation.
Yeah, thanks for all of those readiness signals. I think just to sum that up, right? Some green lights are that a company has the right capacity allocated, documentation, architecture, and governance to see a project through. Some red flags are what we call speed theater, no plan, no owner, and accountability around that. So thanks for sharing those readiness signals. When the 2 of you, your companies, our PSI Global and Techfino come together and work together with clients and work together with companies to do this. You've built sort of this framework for success that is strategy first, then architecture, then build, right? And Brian, what does that look like if a company were to not just go to an implementer and say, here's my blueprint, or go to an implementer and not have a blueprint, but that's the old way, right? Like that way we've established is full of gaps and holes and leads to these leaks in budget, over timeline, over costs, all of these pains that really hurt our businesses and slow us down. But in your approach, how do you do this differently? Sit with clients together, Yafa and Brian, and your 2 companies to make this a successful outcome for a company?
Yeah, so I think it really starts in sort of the 2 areas that we don't really specialize in. And so that's where we would recommend our PSI Global is really to start with a discovery and really get clear about what it is that you're looking to accomplish, what you're going to need to be successful, and then you're doing your ERP readiness assessment. That's really the second phase. I think, Yafa, you could articulate that a little bit better to me, what you're doing these days there.
Right. So again, we're doing the discovery and the readiness assessment. This is when, the first kind of part of the engagement, when we are brought in, when RPSI Global is brought in, we are working with the C-suite, we're working with the business leads to understand, how ready are they to actually start any transformation projects, right? Most times it's ERP, sometimes it's e-commerce, sometimes it is very complex, for example, transportation solutions, procurement solutions, so on and so forth. WMS, the list goes on, right? So understanding, are we ready internally? Are we internally aligned? Do we understand our goals, our objectives? Do we understand our own processes? Can we convey those processes? Do we understand our data? Do we understand our landscape of systems? And do we have a brief? Do we have a brief so that when we are going to SIs, we have a brief that we can actually share, as opposed to starting completely from scratch, scrambling to get information, paying license fees on software that we haven't even started using yet, right? Going back to whether it's 1 year, 2 year, 3 year implementation. So we help work with the business to do that discovery, that internal readiness, prepare the brief. And that's when we're bringing in the SI, Tecfino, to actually now look at that brief, look at the requirements, and now work through and dive much deeper into the solution architecture, right? And that's where the solution architecture gets done. And then, Brian, you can kind of talk about some of the other stages from there.
Yeah, so I think the solution architecture, especially when you have the complexity that you do across multiple systems and departments, and you have your financial module, you have your sales, marketing, you have your reporting. It's really important that you have that solid blueprint and foundation to build on top of. And so that's really what we're doing in solution architecture. And then when we go into our build or implementation phase, we can take a phased approach instead of trying to eat the elephant. We can eat the elephant, in small bites. And that's really what we do. What we like to do in a lot of our implementations is try to figure out what's that sort of minimum viable product, to use the sort of a software analogy, so that we can bring the business live, get the value out of the system, but also make sure they're able to operate and get the improvements by switching to NetSuite, their legacy software, from day one. And then on post implementation, we have to make sure that the client's able to adopt the new system and is enabled to use it. And in some cases, they'll take over supporting and maintaining it. In other cases, they'll continue to work with us in that sort of support and continuous optimization phase. And so that's where we take those initial sprints. We break them into several optimization projects after the initial go live, and we can implement those over this series of weeks, months, or years, even after the initial go live. And so that's requires you to do change management between your production work stream and then your support or production support work stream. So that's typically our approach to implementations for success. And then in other cases, we also have a system health check. And so we can do that, which is more related to post implementation, making sure that the system is being optimized and used properly, right? So we can look at all the bad smells and sort of recommend optimizations to improve the NetSuite operations from both a data perspective, integration perspective, and a maintenance perspective.
Brian, when I think about the companies that are on the call today listening to your stories, they really have 3 paths, I believe. So correct me if this needs to be expanded, but from what I'm hearing, there's 3 paths here. They could either try to go it alone, do it in-house, which some of the examples and the stories you gave, that's where they started, right? They can bring in an implementer and pair that with their in-house team to try to move forward, or they could bring in this sort of design build team like RPSI Global and Tecfino, whereas the 2 of you together coming in and being, having everybody sitting at the table at the same time and organizing this together from strategy to architecture to build, where everybody has a seat at the table and we're considering all of the pieces, the data, the build, the fields, the business impact across the CFO, the COO, the CI, all the departments. Like this feels like the third option, right? As to a path that companies could take. And so I'm going to throw up on the screen a model of what that could look like, in that framework of those steps of starting with discovery with the two of you. Does that accurately describe what the paths are that you think companies have when they find themselves in this situation?
Absolutely. Yeah. Ideally, we would have a discovery and readiness assessment. A lot of times clients come to us without this, right? We would much rather them come through this sort of process where they have that clarity, they know what they're expecting, they're set up for success before they even pick up the phone and call us, right?
Yeah, yeah. And one thing I've learned about both of you, Yafa, you are a strong advocate for the client. When you are in there and you're advising, you're very strategic, but your advocacy is very strong. And Brian, you are very strategic and you do the right thing by the client all the time, right? So seeing the two of you put this framework together and to engage together is just a win for the companies that hire you to do that, right? It's
Right. Absolutely. And I think that, I mean, we've been in a space for a very long time, both Brian and myself, right? And we are seeing time and time again where the challenges are, where the source of the challenges is at. And often it's because that stage zero, ground zero, being discovery and the overall readiness assessment within clients, it's skipped, it's fast forwarded through, right? And by having that stage, by having that readiness, it really elevates the success. It elevates the overall experience of navigating an implementation project. It strips out a lot of the surprises, the unknowns, the escalations. Um, and, while we at RPSI are doing just discovery and readiness assessment first, many times, majority of our engagements, the clients wants us to stay on to do the ongoing project management, program management, and again, building that relationship of continuing to hold the SI accountable for a quality of delivery, right? Quality of delivery and overall accountability. And we just find that generally in these engagements, we're not experiencing escalations, right? We are just navigating the stages of the project and there's a rhythm, and the clients really appreciate that rhythm.
yes, yes. I see that, and that drives the point home about the advocacy, right?
Right.
That psychological safety of knowing that you are on their side and you are looking out for the company. When it comes down to it, right? This solves a couple of things. It solves the ROI, the cost overages, the timelines, the fatigue of the people involved, and it is able to prevent some of that and makes the project overall successful. The psychological safety of being able to sleep at night knowing you are on my team.
Absolutely.
Now
And it also allows these, leaders, whether C-suite business leads, to focus on their day-to-day job, right? As opposed to constantly trying to um, manage a project that they're not an expert in. They're not an expert in a transformation project, right? Yeah.
Yeah. All right, folks. So whether you are pre, mid, or post with your ERP implementation, this flow is going to meet you where you are. And what we'd like to do is we'd like to offer you a free 30-minute ERP readiness consult. In that 30 minutes, you're going to come into an appointment and walk away. It's going to have a purpose. You're going to walk away, within 48 to 72 hours with a very simple go, no go, or let's optimize it this way kind of roadmap. And no slide deck, just guidance during that call. The link here is at the bottom of the screen. So you can go ahead and click that link and schedule your 30-minute assessment and, see where you fit. So Brian and Yava, you've shared a lot of really valuable information, insight, stories, experience, And this isn't theory, and this isn't just something that looks good on paper. You've shared some of the messy details, and we appreciate those stories that are invaluable to the listeners to be able to circumvent some of the situations that you found other companies in, and perhaps, do this a better way so they can sleep at night. Thanks everyone for joining. I'm going to put some contact information up on the screen here, and you can reach out to Brian or Yafa or either of their companies. Feel free to follow them on LinkedIn. They often share some of their insight that you can follow along. And if you enjoyed this, let us know. We'll be back with more stories from the field.